My wife took my credit score from 800 to 530 in 2 years, so I divorced her. Bought a new house in cash and blocked her on everything. A 32-year-old guy. And when I married Sarah, I thought I'd found my forever. From the moment we met, everything clicked. We shared the same dreams, the same sense of humor, and, weirdly enough, the same obsession with planning for the future. Late at night, we'd sit on the couch with spreadsheets open, mapping out budgets, debating mortgage options, and fantasizing about the house we'd one day own. It felt like we were building not just a life, but a fortress secure, unstoppable. Together, Sarah always seemed responsible. She'd compliment me on my organization, saying, "I don't know how you keep track of everything, but it makes me feel safe." And honestly, it did. Friends constantly gawked at us like we were some kind of modern-day power couple. "You two are goals," they'd joke, and I'd smile, secretly puffed up with pride. I liked seeing Sarah's eyes light up when I explained our investment strategy or how I'd forecast our savings for the year. Those little moments made me feel like we were perfect, like nothing could go wrong. I kept meticulous records, logging every bill, every transfer, every account balance. I trusted her completely. If she said a payment was taken care of, I believed her. If she suggested reallocating funds for some new joint purchase, I'd nod along, confident that together we had the system down. It never occurred to me that one day those very systems I'd relied on could be weaponized against me. The first time a twinge of doubt nudged at me, I barely noticed. It was a small charge on our shared credit card, a pricey boutique handbag she claimed was a gift for a friend. Oh. I didn't question it. I didn't even log it in my spreadsheet. At the time, it felt insignificant, almost trivial. But looking back now, I can see the first crack in our perfect facade. The feeling lingered, subtle, almost invisible, like a shadow stretching across the sunlit room we thought was ours. And I didn't know it yet, but that shadow was only the beginning. It started small, almost imperceptibly. I noticed odd withdrawals from our joint account, little things at first, like extra dinners out or subscriptions I didn't recognize. At first, I chalked it up to forgetfulness or a mistake. Maybe I missed a payment, I told myself, logging in to double-check. But the pattern kept growing. The amounts became bigger, the frequency higher, and every time I asked, Sarah would flash that disarming smile and say, "I've got it covered. Don't worry." And I believed her. I wanted to. I loved her. I wanted to trust her completely, like I always had. But lying there at night, scrolling through our statements, a pit began to form in my stomach. I tried to convince myself it was normal, that maybe our budget just needed tweaking, that I was overreacting. I kept a mental tally, making silent notes to ask her later, but every time I brought it up, she turned the conversation into a lecture about control and trust. "You're obsessed with numbers," she'd say. Leaning across the kitchen counter, "Not everything has to be calculated." I hated the way her words made me doubt myself. I hated the nagging feeling that maybe I was losing control over the one thing. I'd always prided myself in our financial life. And yet, she smiled. She reassured me, and somehow I let it slide. Friends would call us enviable. But I started to feel like I was the only one awake in a house built on illusions. One night, I opened the credit card app to pay the monthly bill and froze. There it was. A $1,200 charge at a furniture store I didn't recognize, dated 2 days ago. I confronted her immediately. "Sarah, what's this?" My voice was tight, my chest constricted. "Oh, that," she said casually, sipping her wine. "Just something I picked up for the living room. You don't need to stress about it." I nodded slowly, heart hammering, and logged it down silently. At the time, it seemed harmless, a minor lapse. But deep down, a seed of unease was planted, and I could feel it starting to grow. Something in her calmness told me this wasn't the last surprise. I'd see it was around the 6-month mark of our marriage that things really started to spiral. I logged into my credit report one evening, half expecting to see a minor dip from a late payment or a forgotten subscription. What I saw instead made my stomach drop. Multiple maxed-out credit cards I didn't open, small personal loan I never applied for, and several unpaid balances I hadn't authorized. I stared at the screen, blinking, hoping it was some glitch, some mistake I could easily fix. But the numbers didn't lie. Sarah. "What the hell is this?" I asked, my voice shaking as I pointed at the screen. She leaned over casually, brushing her hair back like she'd expected me to freak out. "Oh, that. I thought it would help us qualify for a better interest rate on the house," she said smoothly. "Don't worry, I've got it handled." I wanted to believe her. I really did. But something inside me snapped. How could someone I trusted so completely make decisions that risked everything we'd planned together? I felt betrayed, panicked, and humiliated all at once. My mind raced through worst-case scenarios: denied loans, ruined credit, financial ruin. Sleep became impossible. I'd lie awake staring at the ceiling, imagining calls from debt collectors, or worse. Having to explain this mess to our families, I began combing through every bank statement, every transaction, trying to piece together what had happened. But every time I confronted her, the same pattern repeated: charm, reassurance, and gaslighting that made me doubt my memory. "You're overreacting," she'd say. "I'm just helping." By the end of the week, I realized that this wasn't just a mistake or a lapse in judgment. It was deliberate, and that realization crushed me. The person I thought I could rely on more than anyone in the world was quietly dismantling my life, one charge at a time. I remember sitting at the kitchen table that night, staring at the pile of statements, my hands trembling. Outside, the streetlights cast long shadows through the blinds, and the house that once felt safe now felt like a trap. And in that moment, I knew I was already in over my head. And there was no turning back. The gaslighting started subtly at first, then escalated into something I couldn't ignore. Every time I questioned Sarah about a transaction, a late payment, or a new charge, she had a way of turning it around on me. "You're being paranoid," she said one evening, her voice dripping with casual authority as she leaned against the kitchen counter. "I've never done anything to hurt you. Why are you obsessing over every little number?" I wanted to argue, to make her see that this wasn't paranoia, it was reality. But the more I pushed, the more she made me doubt myself. I'd replay conversations in my head, wondering if maybe I was imagining things, overreacting, losing touch with reality. Nights became torture. I'd lie awake, the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of traffic outside somehow amplifying my anxiety. My chest ached and my hands shook when I opened the next month's statements. One night, I finally confronted her again. "Sarah, I saw another credit card charge. It's thousands of dollars." I didn't approve it. "This isn't okay," she sighed, putting a hand on my arm. "You really need to relax. I know what I'm doing. Trust me, I'm trying to help us." I wanted to believe her, but I couldn't. The trust I'd had since day one was cracking. Tiny fissures spreading across the foundation of our marriage. The fear was suffocating. Even small purchases felt like landmines now. I started double-checking everything, obsessively logging receipts. But it never felt enough. Friends noticed the change in me, how tense I'd become. How distracted at work, but I couldn't bring myself to tell anyone. How do you explain that the person you married is slowly dismantling your life under the guise of helping? That night, I sat at the kitchen table with the soft hum of the microwave in the background. Staring at the ledger I'd started keeping, the numbers were mounting, the discrepancies growing, and I realized with a sinking dread that this wasn't going to stop. Something had shifted. I had a sinking feeling that the real storm hadn't even hit yet. By the time I confronted Sarah about the escalating charges again, I was on edge like never before. "Sarah, we need to talk," I said, my voice tight as I held up the latest stack of credit card statements. "These aren't small things anymore. Thousands of dollars. Multiple accounts. I didn't approve any of this." She looked up from her phone, feigning surprise, and let out a small, sarcastic laugh. "Wow, you're really obsessing over numbers again, huh? I'm just trying to make our lives easier. Can't you see that?" Her calmness made my blood boil. How could she sit there so casually, knowing the damage she was doing? I felt a cocktail of fear, betrayal, and helplessness wash over me. I wanted to scream, to shake her until she admitted the truth. But all that came out was a trembling whisper. "This is my credit, Sarah. My life." "How could you do this?" She shrugged, tapping her finger against the table. "It's not a big deal. Stop making it one. You're just overthinking everything." I realized in that moment that she wasn't going to take responsibility. She wasn't going to stop. The more I tried to assert control, the more she deflected, manipulated, and twisted the narrative until I questioned myself. It was infuriating, exhausting, and terrifying. I felt trapped in a relationship where the person I trusted most was actively undermining me. And worse, convincing me I was the problem. That week, I secretly scheduled a meeting with a financial advisor, my hands shaking as I held the appointment card. I needed to understand the full extent of the damage, and the truth hit me like a punch. If this continued, it could take years, maybe decades to recover. Mortgages, loans, credit cards, all of it was at risk. As I sat at my desk, the cold glow of the computer screen illuminating the worry lines on my face, I realized something else. This wasn't just a financial problem. It was a betrayal of the deepest kind. And for the first time, I felt something stir beneath the fear, the faintest spark of resolve. But even as I thought about taking action, I couldn't shake the dread. What else hadn't she told me? What other surprises were hidden behind that calm, calculating smile? I'll never forget the day I saw my credit score drop to 530. I sat on the edge of our bed, phone in hand, staring at the number as if it were a punch to the gut. 5, 3, 0. My carefully built 800 had been obliterated in just 2 years. My hands were trembling so badly I could barely scroll through the rest of the report. Every late payment, every unauthorized card, every secret loan, all added up. I felt hollow. The walls of our apartment, once warm and familiar, now felt like they were closing in on me. The hum of the fridge in the kitchen, the distant barking of a neighbor's dog, even the soft ticking of the wall clock, it all seemed amplified, echoing my panic. I'd always prided myself on being organized, responsible, careful, and now I felt powerless, humiliated, and completely exposed. "Sarah, what's happening?" I asked, my voice breaking, looking at her as if pleading for an explanation, for some sign that this wasn't real. She tilted her head, eyes wide, feigning innocence. "What do you mean? I've always been dramatic about finances. Relax, I'm managing things. The words cut like a knife. Realized then that I wasn't just dealing with carelessness, I was being sabotaged. And the reality of it hit me harder than anything I'd ever faced. My credit score wasn't just a number. It was my stability, my reputation, my freedom. And it had been stolen. I sank into the corner of the bedroom, heart hammering, head in my hands. The weight of the betrayal pressed down so heavily that I couldn't breathe properly. For the first time in my life, I felt truly trapped, not by circumstance, but by someone I had trusted more than anyone. In that moment, staring at the cold walls and the evidence of everything unraveling, I understood something terrifying. If I didn't act, this would destroy me completely. And yet, even as panic and despair washed over me, a part of me began to steel itself. I had hit rock bottom, and from here, there was no going back. After days of sleepless nights and endless scrolling through bank statements, I finally made the decision. I couldn't stay married to someone who was quietly dismantling my life. Not anymore. I called a divorce lawyer, my hands shaking as I scheduled the first appointment, heart hammering in a mix of fear and determination. Filing for divorce felt like both a death and a rebirth. It was terrifying to think about starting over alone. But the alternative, staying trapped in a marriage that was bleeding me dry, was unthinkable. When I told Sarah I wanted to separate finances and eventually divorce, she looked at me like I'd just announced the apocalypse. "Are you serious? You're overreacting?" "This isn't necessary," she said, her voice dripping with that same casual manipulation. I stood my ground, feeling the adrenaline surge. "Sarah, this isn't about overreacting. This is about taking back my life. I can't keep watching my future slip through our fingers." The house, once a sanctuary, now felt suffocating. Every corner reminded me of compromises, whispered promises, and the illusion of safety I'd been living under. Hardest I'd lie in bed, listening to the quiet hum of the city outside. Heart racing, wondering how I had trusted so blindly. But beneath the fear, there was a flicker of resolve I hadn't felt in months. I had to reclaim control. I started meticulously separating our finances, closing joint accounts, changing passwords, and documenting every transaction, every small. Victory bill finally reconciled. An account secured felt like a tiny explosion of relief. It wasn't just about money. It was about autonomy, about taking back the life that had been systematically undermined. But even as I locked down the accounts and made plans to rebuild, a small gnawing fear lingered. What else hadn't I seen? What other damage had been done behind her calm, calculating smile? I knew I was taking the first step toward freedom, but the shadows of betrayal were still thick around me. And I couldn't shake the sense that the storm wasn't over. Once the divorce process began, I threw myself into rebuilding my life, starting with my finances. I liquidated small investments, meticulously mapped out a budget, and began paying off the debts I could control. I felt a strange mix of fear and empowerment. For the first time in months, I was making decisions solely for myself. But even as I took charge, there was a gnawing anxiety in the back of my mind. What else might be hidden? That's when I discovered it. The midpoint twist hit like a sledgehammer. She had secretly drained a portion of my retirement fund, transferring money I didn't even know existed into accounts I couldn't access. I stared at the online statements, heart sinking, disbelief turning quickly into rage. Everything I'd worked for, everything I thought was safe, had been systematically eroded. I felt like I'd been punched repeatedly by someone I trusted more than anyone else in the world. I remember pacing the apartment late that night, the floorboards creaking beneath my feet, the dull glow of the streetlights casting long shadows across the walls.
Ow.
The hum of the refrigerator was deafening. I thought about all the late nights, spent planning for a future together, all the conversations about security, stability, and dreams. And now it was gone, or at least in jeopardy. But amidst the anger, something clicked. This betrayal, as devastating as it was, lit a fire in me. I realized that I couldn't undo what she had done, but I could control what came next. I started exploring alternative ways to regain stability, thinking creatively about investments, cash purchases, and strategies to protect myself from further sabotage. By the end of that week, I had a plan. A concrete, realistic path to financial independence. For the first time in months, I felt a flicker of hope. But as I stared out the window at the city skyline, sipping my cold coffee, I couldn't shake. The underlying tension, this was just the beginning of my journey. And the shadow of betrayal was still lingering, waiting to test me further. Buying a house in cash felt like the ultimate reclaiming of my life. I had been saving quietly, moving money around, investing smartly. And now, finally, I could make a purchase that didn't require anyone's approval or trust, especially hers. Walking into the real estate office that morning, the smell of fresh paint and polished wood hitting my senses, I felt a thrill I hadn't experienced in years. This wasn't just about bricks and mortar. It was about freedom, control, and a tangible victory over the chaos she'd left behind. The realtor led me through the empty rooms, and I imagined life here on my own terms. Sunlight streamed through the large windows, illuminating the hardwood floors, and I could almost hear my own laughter filling the spaces instead of tension and arguments. I signed the paperwork, heart pounding, and when the keys were handed to me, it felt like holding the first piece of my life back. For the first time in years, I could breathe without the constant weight of financial sabotage pressing down on me. Driving home with the keys in my pocket, the city lights blurring past, I felt a quiet euphoria. I pictured myself painting walls, setting up furniture, hosting friends who would finally see me as more than just that guy in trouble with his credit. Every corner of that house promised stability, independence, and peace, things I hadn't felt in far too long that night. I unlocked the door, stepped inside, and let it click shut behind me. The apartment that had once felt safe, but suffocating, now seemed like a distant memory, a shadow of a life I was finally leaving behind. I sat on the empty living room floor, feeling the cool boards beneath my hands, listening to the hum of silence, and realized that this house wasn't just a home, it was a statement. But even in that moment of triumph, a tiny part of me lingered on what else she might have hidden. The storm wasn't fully over yet, and I knew, deep down, that reclaiming my life would demand more than just financial moves. Cutting her out completely was harder than I thought it would be. It wasn't just about money anymore. It was about my peace of mind, my sanity, and finally reclaiming control over my own life. I went through my phone, email, and social media accounts, systematically blocking her everywhere. Each tap felt like a small victory, but also a reminder of how much she had infiltrated my life. I remember staring at my phone after the final block, my thumb hovering over the screen one last time before letting it go. The silence that followed was deafening. No messages, no notifications, no sudden pings that would make my stomach drop. For the first time in months, I felt a sense of calm I hadn't thought possible. The house was mine. My finances were slowly stabilizing. And for the first time, I could breathe without constant dread. Friends noticed the change immediately. "You look lighter," one said over dinner, watching me sip my coffee. "Like a weight's been lifted." I nodded, half smiling, but inside I was still wary. Trust had been shattered, and the echoes of betrayal still lingered. Every sound, the distant traffic, the creak of the floorboards, even the soft hum of the refrigerator reminded me of how fragile security had once been. Even so, there was empowerment in boundaries. I realized that reclaiming my life meant removing every toxic tether she had to me, cutting the cord completely. It was a brutal but necessary step. No excuses, no half measures, no leaving the door open for more surprises. That night, sitting alone in the empty living room, I felt a strange mix of relief and lingering tension. I had finally severed the connection, but the shadow of what she had done still lingered. The silence was comforting, yes, but also eerie, a quiet reminder that freedom had a cost. And deep down, I knew that the real work rebuilding myself, rebuilding my confidence, and ensuring nothing like this could happen again was only just beginning. Sitting in my new house, finally, free from her constant manipulation, I began to reflect on everything that had happened. The betrayal, the stolen money, the ruined credit, it all played on a loop in my mind. But instead of breaking me, it started fueling a quiet, burning resolve. I realized that I couldn't undo what she had done, but I could rebuild, stronger and smarter than before. Every late night spent worrying, every panic attack over unknown charges, every sleepless moment had prepared me for this next phase. Taking back control, fully and unapologetically. I began small, making financial moves she couldn't touch, paying off old debts faster than expected, investing strategically, and even securing deals she had assumed would be out of reach. Each victory, no matter how minor, felt like a tiny, sweet revenge away to prove to myself that I wasn't powerless. Friends began noticing the change too, commenting on my energy, my confidence, the subtle swagger that came from knowing I was finally steering my own life. The midpoint betrayal, the retirement fund, still stung when I thought about it. But now it was a fuel rather than a wound. I meticulously tracked every dollar, every account, every plan, ensuring that nothing could ever slip through the cracks again. I even started imagining scenarios she would have freaked out over, buying things outright, making financial moves without her input, and enjoying the freedom she had never allowed me, and yet, there was still an emotional satisfaction I couldn't quantify. I'd endured her deception, survived her gaslighting, and now I was thriving while she had no control, no access, no power. The irony was delicious. I smiled quietly to myself as I poured another cup of coffee, listening to the soft hum of the refrigerator, feeling the walls of the house, my house, encapsulate everything I had fought to reclaim. But even as the empowerment settled over me, I knew the final step was still coming. Complete closure wasn't just about money or accounts. It was about proving to myself that I had emerged from the storm unbroken, and that the life she tried to sabotage would now be mine in full, untainted and untouchable. The final step was the sweetest part of reclaiming my life: full closure. I'd rebuilt my finances, secured my house, and blocked every avenue she could use to manipulate me. Standing in my empty living room, sunlight spilling across the polished hardwood floors, I realized something profound. I was finally free. Free from her lies, her sabotage, and the constant fear that had haunted me for years. Every corner of this house reflected independence. Every wall echoed empowerment, and for the first time in a long time, I smiled without hesitation. I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat by the window, watching the world move outside. The city seemed quieter somehow, as if it knew I had taken back control. I thought about the months of betrayal, the sleepless nights, the panic, and the despair. And yet, here I was, stronger, wiser, and unshakable. There was no bitterness left, just clarity. The house, the finances, even the peace of mind. It wasn't revenge for her. It was a celebration of my survival, my intelligence, and my resilience. A small part of me couldn't resist reflecting on the irony. The woman who had tried to destroy my life had inadvertently forged a version of me that was more capable, more self-reliant, and more determined than ever. The storm she created had been fierce, but it had shaped me, hardened me, and prepared me for this life of independence. Every decision I made from now on would be my own, free of interference, free of fear. As I stood up, stretching and letting the warmth of the morning sun wash over me, I felt a quiet, profound satisfaction. I'd reclaimed everything she had tried to take and more. This was the life she tried to sabotage, mine. And I would guard it fiercely, with no apologies, no regrets, and no room for anyone to ever undermine me again. The house felt alive in a way it never had before, full of promise and possibility. And for the first time in years, I realized that freedom wasn't just about money or walls. It was about knowing deep in my bones that I was untouchable.